Several years ago, there was a cartoon. In this comic, there was a picture of several animals standing around discussing, admiring a lucky rabbit's foot. Several of the animals were discussing how impressed they were with the rabbit who had given up its whole foot so that somebody else could have good luck. One animal offered an alternative and suggested that they be deeply moved with the foot. After all, while the rabbit had given up its whole foot for somebody to have good luck, the foot had given up its whole rabbit for somebody to have good luck. I don't have a position on this. I don't know what the right answer is. But I do know that perspective matters. And having the wrong perspective can be dangerous. I'd like to talk about two perspectives. They are not actually directly related to each other. This is going to be like two mini sermons, if you will, if you'll allow that for me. The first perspective is going to be what we refer to sometimes as our bucket list. And you might want to turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. We'll read there in a minute. While you're turning there, it would be prudent for me to thank you for at least 5 years of support that you've been sending to us, joining in our work, having fellowship in our work. I'm not going to take this time really to talk about the church, the work. If you want to know something, please ask. I'm just not going to use this time to talk about it. Briefly, I will say this. It is my perspective that the church there is growing. I know it's growing in number because in 2024 and a little earlier, there were at least 6 people baptized into Christ, and some wonderful, beautiful, encouraging stories there. If you want to know about them, please ask me, my wife, or read the reports or something like that. Not only are there new converts coming in, but you can teach an old dog new tricks. The older folks, the ones who have been members there for many years, they are also growing. I too am growing. That work there is a different kind of work than I've ever been involved in, mostly the size of it, 50, 60, 70 people. I'm used to smaller congregations. So I am growing also. And in theory, as 1 Timothy chapter 4 would say, as somebody with this kind of influence grows, well, then the congregation will grow also. So we are blessed that way, and we are blessed to have you sending us support every month. Again, I don't want to dismiss the importance of that, and if anybody wants to ask me a question, or my wife, or anybody wants to know anything about it, please seek us out later on. We'll be happy to talk about that. But right now, it's time to be fed from God's Word. So, this perspective, this first perspective of our bucket list, it was prompted by an evangelist who came and had a gospel meeting, and during his gospel meeting, he said something which I had to return to later because when he said it at first, it spoke to me. Here's what he said. You might know him, Joe Works, it doesn't matter. He's not inspired, but what he said is something that we need to consider. What he said is this: we just feel like we need to have more. And as soon as he said that, I said, oh great, he's talking to me. He went on to say, what is on your list? What is your bucket list made of? Now, often we talk about a bucket list as something, places we'd like to go, things we'd like to do. This is a little bit broader than that, but it's the idea, what are you filling your time with? And then he said these words, which stung. The next words are this: I think for most people, they just need to dump that bucket out and start over. So I returned to this later on in my private meditations, and I'm guessing it's the same thing down here. We fill our lives, we clutter our lives with things we don't need And these things greatly impede, or even, depending on their influence over us, prevent us from focusing on and doing what is truly important. For example, houses and properties. And right off the bat, you're like, Lee, we need houses and properties. I get that. But do we need that house and that property? That's what we're talking about here. So 1 Timothy 4 and 6 both talk about God has given us a beautiful world to enjoy. Amen. Good food to enjoy. I get that. Amen. Thank you, God, for that. This is about balance. This is about not loving the world so much that we forget about who we are and what we're supposed to be about. That's our focus here. Cars. Do we need 3 cars? I generally, we need a car. I get that. Do we need 3 cars? Do we need that car? Tools for you men. I love tools. Machinery for you ladies. Maybe machinery. Horses. Appliances. You fill in what would apply to you. Toys, luxury stuff, overtime. Because you see, the reason I need the overtime is so I can have the stuff. You've been there. There are times we need to work overtime to pay the bills because we have family, we have sickness, we have whatever. We want to help somebody else who has family and sickness. I get that. And then there are times where I work overtime so much just to have sheep. We have sheep. We have a dog, 3 cats. Sometimes we have pigs. And all of that costs time and money. And I don't know what you have, but we work the overtime so that we can have the stuff. And it kind of snowballs. Education, skills, improvement. On the way down here, I forget the exact program, but somebody who is a lawyer, a good friend, somebody in the family, was talking about how they're adding an additional skill, project management, some project management platform. Good for him, but sometimes we don't need to add more and more. Hobbies, animals, activities for kids, sports. Non-spiritually centered socializing, good stuff. But this is about balance. Now, obviously, I think everything on this list, if I might be wrong, but everything on this list, you can be faithful. So don't get me wrong. Everything on this list, I think, you can be faithful. But at the same time, we don't want to be just faithful. We want to be focused. We want to be strong. Those of us who are parents tell our children to grow up to marry Christians. And then, if we're wise, we include not just anybody who's been baptized, but somebody who's strong. So this is the same idea here. I don't want to just be faithful. I want to be faithful. But I want to be focused. I want to be as strong. Be all you can be. I want to be all I can be in the kingdom. That's who we're talking about here. This discussion is for people who want to be all they can be in the Lord's kingdom. Focused, strong, mature, faithful, and more. For example, in 1 Corinthians 7, so finally we're turning here. 1 Corinthians 7, you'll see the principle. It's related. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 32. The middle of it says, one who is unmarried is concerned about the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But the one who is married is concerned about the things of the world, how he may please his wife. You see right there. Right here, there's a principle we understand. That the more we're involved in things of the world, the less we can focus on pure dedication to the kingdom. Now, if that's true about marriage, which God created, how much more is that true about people who are married to all these things? Again, verse 34, his interests are divided. The woman who is unmarried and the virgin is concerned about the things of the Lord, that she may be holy both in body and spirit. But the one who is married is concerned about the things of the world, how she may please her husband. Again, this is not saying you can't be faithful and be married. That's not what this is saying. It's saying once you involve yourself in this over here, it necessarily requires you are a little less involved over here. And if that's true about marriage, which God has created and brings glory to Him, then how much more is it true about being married to these things, which some of them we need, but we don't need that one. We don't need the big one. We don't need the shiny one, the gold one. This same principle we'll also see in Hebrews. So in Hebrews chapter 5, verse 14, the principle is this: I don't want to be just a Christian. I want to be a strong one. Solid food is for the mature. That's who I want to be. Who, because of practice, have their senses trained to discern good and evil. See, you get to choose. All of this is talking about opportunity cost, if anybody's familiar with that term. If you're going to choose to work on overtime to get the house, then that's the opportunity cost is, that's time I can't study, for example. It's time I can't pray. It's time I can't go and help somebody else and grow that way. And the more I'm practicing these things, the less I'm able to practice this. Again, you can be faithful. I'm not saying you can't, but we want to. Who wants to be all you can be in the Lord's kingdom? I do. And so this is the perspective I need to have. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, in verse 23. All things are lawful. He is not saying there's no such thing as sin. It's somewhat of a tautology. But all the things that you may do, and there's a lot of it out there, all things are lawful, but not all things are profitable. All things are lawful, but not all things edify. And so, if at the end of the race, I want to be the strongest, the most mature Christian I can be, I'm going to make some choices. And those choices are going to include, while I am permitted by God to pursue this thing over here, I'm going to choose not to because of the opportunity cost. I don't want to be the one talent man. I know I'm going to begin at the 2 talent level. But in the end, I want to be the 5 talent guy. And that doesn't just happen. Jesus told His disciples not only to bear fruit, but to bear much fruit. In another passage, the one about the parable of the sower, he goes out, it falls on the good soil. Mark's account says, and the good soil would bear some 30, some 60, and some 100-fold. I want to be, by God's grace, the person who bears 60 or 100-fold. That's who I want to be. So that's what we're talking about here. And these things, although they are not bad in of themselves, and some of them we need, they can impede our progress. And remember this, if Satan can't drag you down and kill you, he'll be satisfied with slowing you down. And this is one of the ways he does it, right here. So, our texts today will focus about this. This is all we're going to talk about just for a few minutes here. Our first one is in Proverbs 15. And I'll say the first 3 texts here really have the same point. There is a comparison or a contrast. There's what you pursue and what accompanies it, the result. So Proverbs 15 and verse 16. Listen to this. Better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and turmoil with it. You hear it right there. Look, if you, again, the Lord may bless you with great treasure, but if you pursue it while you're sacrificing pursuing the fear of the Lord, what can happen but it'll bring turmoil with it. And you have seen, you know some people who have it all. They've got the car, the house, the boat, the vacation, the 401k. They have it all. And their family is a bickering mess. You ever go over there and all they're doing is saying harsh things to each other. On the other hand, verse 16, better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and turmoil with it. Verse 17, better is a dish of vegetables. What are you going to pursue? Are you going to pursue vegetables? Who in here would like to pursue vegetables for tonight? Or the fatted ox? I'll take the fatted ox, right? That's what I want to pursue. But now maybe God will bless me with the fatted ox, but I ought not pursue it. What I ought to be pursuing, what does it say? Better is a dish of vegetables where love is than a fatted ox served with hatred. Look, if you want to pursue the fatted ox, likely that you're going to end up with hatred. I should rather pursue love, and if God gives me a fatted ox, great. But if all that He does is I end up with the vegetables, at least I'll have love. I'll have made the right choice. Will have pursued the good. Proverbs 17, same point. By the way, I said this morning. It was a different sermon, but I said it. If I die right now, you'll have got the point of the first perspective, the first part of this message. Proverbs 17:1, better is a dry morsel and quietness with it than a house full of feasting with strife. We've been to the big house, and some of us can say, I have a big house. That might be a great blessing from God. But the greater blessing from God is actually not only the great house, but quietness with it. That's what we need to pursue. The things that are for building up. Another passage talks about the same thing, Proverbs 16:8. Better is a little with righteousness than great income with, and this says injustice, or you fill it in. We are taught from our youth in this society and most societies, pursue what will bring you great income. And instead we ought to be pursuing righteousness. And if God gives us a great income, what a blessing that is. But at least we'll have pursued the good and the right. Matthew 6 talks about this. It's the passage that talks about not being able to serve God and wealth. You got to make a choice. Which one are you going to choose? In verse 32, we'll just read the two verses. The Gentiles eagerly seek. See, that's what we're talking about there. What are you pursuing? What's on your bucket list? You'll go up to a Gentile. What's on your bucket list? Well, on my bucket list, and the interesting thing here is that this is talking about food and clothing and shelter, which is not much. And even in that situation, God says, don't pursue them. Verse 32, the Gentiles eagerly seek all these things. Your Heavenly Father knows that you need all these things, but seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. See what should be on our bucket list here? His kingdom and His righteousness. This doesn't mean don't get an education. This doesn't mean you're not going to work because God tells you to go to work. This doesn't mean a lot of things. What it does mean is I am going to seek first His kingdom and His righteousness. And if I have that perspective, that will change my life entirely. It'll change my life about when I get up, what time I get up, what I do in the first few hours that I get up, what I think about on my way to work or wherever you're going, while I'm at work, how much time I put in at work. I'm going to realize God has commanded me to work. So I am working, but what I'm really doing first is pursuing His righteousness. That's what I'm doing. And that will help you mentally. When it comes 5 o'clock, you don't have to worry about the bills so much then. I'm going to worry about pursuing His righteousness. And I'm going to drive home and how you spend your night with your family. All of this will be impacted by whether you're pursuing His kingdom and His righteousness or something else. And all the other leads to worry. Right? Seek first His kingdom and His righteousness. And this doesn't mean, and seek the others at the same time. We sometimes approach life like we do college. I majored in engineering with a minor in at the same time. That's not what this is saying. This is saying you're going to major. Your primary goal is seeking first His righteousness and His kingdom. And if He wants to add anything else to you, He will. Leave that up to Him. Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews 12, verse 1. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus. All right, that's what we need to focus on. We need to focus on Jesus. That's what we're pursuing. We're pursuing Jesus. Do you notice how to run? It says in verse 1, let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. So it's with endurance. Some other things modify let us run. Let us lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us. There are two categories of things there. The first is sin. This is saying, look, you want to win the race, you got to set aside sin. Well, that's a no-brainer. We can't sin. That's it. Decisions made for us. There's another category here. Lay aside every encumbrance. One lexicographer says that this fits in the semantic domain of things that happen to us. In other words, it's actually not sin. That's a long way of saying this is not necessarily talking about sin. It's not. It's just life. Things happen to us, or we allow things to happen to us. Put away sin, and also put away a lot of what happens to you. Stop letting it happen to you. Not only sin, but other things also. Another lexicographer says, lay aside every encumbrance. That word refers to material that is ponderously large, heavy, bulky. Yes, you can eventually cross the finish line with all of that dragging you down. But if you want to get there faster, and in this case we're talking about maturity, if you want to get to maturity faster, then get rid of all the stuff, and not all of it is sin. This world has a lot to offer. Not all of it is sin. Even of the stuff that isn't sin, not all of it is profitable. And so I will decide, I want to be strong, I want to be mature, so I'm going to make different decisions. I'm going to have a perspective about life that I'm only going to choose if I'm going to be consistent. What will build me up? So I'm 51 now. If I could have a do-over. Now, I do not want to go back. You know, some people say, boy, I wish I could be younger again. I do not want to. I was not wise. This is evidence of it. If I could change one thing, I would go back to when I was 13 years old. That's when I started working very hard, making lots of money for a 13-year-old, working consistently. But I worked so that I could get stuff. That's why I worked. I worked so I could have the stuff. If I could do over my life, I would not stop working. God tells us to work. But I would no longer work for the stuff. That's what I wish I could do over. I wish I could go back. I don't wish. If I could go back, I would go back to when I was 13 years old, and at that point in my life, I would make some very, very, very different decisions. And I would decide, for example, to spend more time in Bible study. Yeah, even at 13, do you know you can do that? More time in prayer. More time looking around at people my age, people are older, and saying, hey, there's something I can do. I can do over there. I can't do much, I'm 13, but I can do something. I wish, or if I were to go back in time, that is what I would tell me to do. For those of you who are just getting out of college or just getting into college, just getting your degrees, I mean, the world is your oyster, right? I will make this suggestion. Don't pursue it. If God blesses you with it, fantastic. but have the perspective, I will pursue righteousness. I will use everything I have, including this great degree and this great job, to serve God. And for the younger folk who aren't there yet, start practicing these thoughts now. I'm going to conclude this portion, this perspective, with something that I read. It was written by a woman for women. It is very specific. The women can take out of it the principles that are relevant to our discussion. And the men can also. Because this isn't only... The problems she'll talk about are specifically, she addresses women, but these aren't only problems or issues or perspectives that women have get confused about. Men do too. Here we go. Here it is. Maybe some of you know this woman. I read a lot of Christianity Magazine, a publication that stopped years and years ago, so I don't know most of these people. Maybe you do. Here's wisdom. How many of us have plaques on our walls proclaiming home sweet home, or home is where the heart is? Do we believe them, or are they sayings of the past? Do we feel a woman of the 80s, so you know when this is written, can't be happy and actually fulfilled by staying home? Many women today view the biblical roles of godly women as old-fashioned or only for biblical times. However, Isaiah 48 and Romans 15:4 explain that the Bible is for us today, and we should accept that. All right. I don't feel it is always necessarily wrong for a young woman to work outside her home. There are certain situations in which a second income is needed for the necessities of life. Let's stand back. Now, this is where I'm really going with this. Listen, let's stand back with an honest heart, however, and view what our so-called necessities are. Are we working so our children can have warm clothes in the winter? Or so we can look as though we just stepped out of Vogue magazine? Is it for reliable transportation, or that new Mercedes we've had our eye on? Is it so that our family can eat, or so they can eat steak? Proverbs 16:8 says, better is a little with righteousness than great income with injustice. Proverbs 17:3 tells us, the refining pot is for silver, and the furnace for gold, but the Lord tests hearts. The point of this is this. We, to figure out what's really silver, put it all in the refining pot, heat it up, and then we separate what's really silver from what's not. The same with gold. If we really want to know what's pure gold, we throw it in a furnace. God doesn't test gold or silver. He tests hearts. And He does that by putting us in life, including giving us opportunity to choose whatever we want. And what decisions we make will help us understand what God already knows about our hearts. And the application here is, are our hearts really at home? We've got the placards. Proverbs 31:10-31 discusses the worthy woman. What an example. She gives attention to her husband, her children, her household, and the poor. As you look at the overall passage, even her business venture in verse 24 does not disrupt other home duties. How many working women today can claim the same? We rush off to our jobs. This is the point. We rush. We're rushing here, we're rushing there. Women, men alike. We're rushing everywhere. And all of that is opportunity cost. It's not peace and quiet. It's not what God has intended for us. We hand our children to someone else and hire someone to clean our houses. That is not God's plan. And now she's talking to women. We as women are instructed to teach our children, be excellent wives, and rule our households wisely. Are we impressing this upon our daughters? Or are too many of us telling them to find careers because you can't be just a housewife? What about our Christian responsibilities? Are these obligations falling by the wayside as we hurry out the door to work? Do we still send cards, visit, call, or cook for the sick and needy, attend gospel meetings as well as regular services, teach Bible classes, talk to people about the Bible, or engage in our own personal Bible study? If our outside jobs, or whatever the thing is that we're chasing, leave us too tired to do these things, how can we feel we're doing as God commanded? How can full attention be given to these God-given responsibilities while we're chasing all the glittery things? If we are to raise future generations of good Christian wives and mothers and children, we need to start with ourselves. We need to examine our priorities, namely, how well we performed our duties as wives, as mothers, as Christians, as husbands, as wives, as people who live in a world that's got so much to offer. And much of it is not sinful, but so much of it is distracting. And I want to grow up to be as mature as I can. There is a time to dump the bucket. Get a new bucket and start filling that up with what God wants. Somebody else, another woman, wrote this. This is for all of us. The way you study, so how can I fill up the bucket? Because life is busy. The way you study is turn off the TV, find a quiet place and get to your Bible. The way you pray is to arise early and stay up late and enter the closet of your heart. The way you visit the sick is order your life so that you have concern and time. The way you feed the hungry is to take money that otherwise would have been used on self and give it to those in need. The way you confess His name is go to a friend or a neighbor and tell them of the Lord and His church. The way you take up your cross is you learn your everyday God-given obligations and do them. The way you become great is humbly serving in whatever capacity is open to you. So concludes perspective number 1 of our bucket list. Number 2, again, not directly related. This is about our perspective of each other and other people. It is related to doubting Thomas's problem. Turn to John 20 just for a moment. In John 20, Jesus shows Himself alive to the other apostles. Verse 24, Thomas, one of the 12, called Didymus, was not with them when Jesus came, so he wasn't there. So the other disciples were saying to Him, "We have seen the Lord." But He said to them, "Unless I see His hands and the imprint of His nails, and put my finger into the place of His nails, and put my hand into His side, I will not believe." Now there are two things about this. There's what he won't believe and whom he won't believe. What he won't believe is that Jesus is alive. But whom he won't believe is people who he should have believed. That's Jesus' point. Verse 28, Jesus said to him, "Because you have seen me, have you believed? Blessed are they who do not see and yet believed." Specifically, believed people who should have been believed, but Thomas didn't. So there is a little bit in many of us, maybe there's more of it in others of us, that goes around not believing each other. And then what I'm talking about is worse. Not only not believing the good, but believing the false and the wrong. A couple passages will indicate this or illustrate this. In 2 Kings 5, 2 Kings 5, it's Naaman. He's the man who has leper from Aramea. Verse 1, Naaman, the captain of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man with his master and highly respected, because by him the Lord had given victory to Aram. The man was a valiant warrior, but he was also a leper. Now the Arameans had gone out in bands and had taken captive a little girl from the land of Israel, and she waited on Naaman's life. She said to her mistress, "I wish that my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria. Then he would cure him of his leprosy." Naaman went in and told his master, saying, "Thus and thus spoke the girl who is from the land of Israel." Then the king of Aram said, Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel. He departed and took with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothes. This is a gift that says, I want to give you something in exchange for you helping me. This is not a Trojan horse. I'm going to bring you this wonderful gift. All I ask is that you heal me. Verse 6, he brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, And now as this letter comes to you, behold, I have sent Naaman my servant to you, that you may cure him of his leprosy. When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes, and he said, Am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man is sending word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Now, this isn't just him venting to people around him. This is him saying that the other guy also knows I'm not God. He knows I'm not God. He knows I can't do it. What is he up to? And he'll answer it. But consider now, this is what's really going on, he says, and see how he is seeking a quarrel against me. And now that might have been right many other times. This time, it was not right. It was wrong. He was wrong about that. That's what believing the worst does. Somebody comes up to you, they're trying to do A, and you say, You're not trying to do A. You're trying to do the opposite of A. Notice the opportunity cost. So that's bad. That's bad. He missed. That's harmful. More about that in a minute. Verse 8, it happened when Elisha, the man of God, heard the king of Israel had torn his clothes. He sent word to the king saying, Why have you torn your clothes? Now let him come to me, and here's what he will know. He shall know there's a prophet in Israel. Because God took over, this man was able to know there's a prophet in Israel. And this man later on will confess God. But only because God intervened to overcome this guy's mistake. He came to the king of Israel and said, I need help. And the king of Israel said, You don't need help. You're trying to hurt me. And he was wrong. Another example of this is in 2 Kings chapter 10. Same thing happens with David, essentially, or with David, not to David. I think I said 2 Kings. I meant 2 Samuel chapter 10. 2 Samuel chapter 10. It happened afterward that the king of the Ammonites died, and Hanun, his son, became king in his place. David said, I will show kindness to Hanun, the son of Nahash, just as his father showed kindness to me. So David's a good guy. He's sending his condolences. David sent some of his servants to console him concerning his father. But when David's servants came to the land of the Ammonites, the princes of the Ammonites said to Hanun their lord, Do you think that David is honoring your father? Which David was. Has not David sent his servants to you in order to search the city, to spy it out, and to overthrow it? Here's another example of what we often do. Not only do we not believe them, but we believe the worst of them. Here's another example of it. Even in the Old Testament, more in the New Testament. And again, the opportunity cost will be this leads to war for them. Another example, you can turn to Proverbs 18 first. Proverbs 18 gives us wise advice. Verse 13. He who gives an answer before he hears, it is a folly and a shame to him. One of the other philosophers of the world has said, it is a capital mistake to theorize before one has the facts. That's what this is saying here. He who gives an answer, I know what's happening, but you don't have all the details. That doesn't matter. I know what's going on here. It's a folly and a shame to him. That's a foolish thing to do. Get all the information first. Now, with that in mind, turn to 1 Samuel. In 1 Samuel, this is where Hannah doesn't have a child. She's praying, she's praying, she's praying. Verse 12, so she's in the temple, pouring out her guts. You've been there, you've done that. It came about as she continued praying before the Lord that Eli was watching her mouth. As for Hannah, she was speaking in her heart, only her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. And so Eli sees that. An idea pops into his head. He does not first ask her to confirm. Instead, then Eli said to her, so Eli thought she was drunk. Okay, it's not completely unreasonable to think that. But before confirming it, he then accuses her of it. Eli thought she was drunk. Eli said to her, "How long will you make yourself drunk? Put away your wine from you." That was wrong. Is wrong what he said? It's wrong what he did to her. He falsely accused her. I'm going to skip the next passage and go right to 1 Samuel 22. And if I'm right, this is the next to last verse. In 1 Samuel 22, this is King Saul. King Saul after David had been anointed, and King Saul was not right. Verse 6, Saul heard that David and the men who were with him had been discovered. So Saul was sitting in Gibeah under the tamarisk tree on the height with his spear in hand. This is 1 Samuel 22, verse 7. And all his servants were standing around him. Saul said to his servants who stood around him, "Hear now, O Benjamites." Saul is a Benjamite. He's talking to his own family here. "Will the son of Jesse also give to all of you fields and vineyards? Will he make you all commanders of thousands, commanders of hundreds? For all of you have conspired against me, so there is no one who discloses to me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse." Now, the short of it is this. If you've read your history, you understand that Saul's men were always with him. They would die for him. Sometimes they would say, "Saul, you've gone too far." This is one of those chapters. But right here, here's a man who is consumed. He has a heart problem. And so one of the manifestations of his heart problem is he thinks the worst of everybody around him, everywhere he goes, including his own family. Verse 8, "For all of you have conspired against me, so that there is no one who discloses to me when my son makes a covenant." Well, there's this horrible person, Doeg, there. And he says, I know. So they go to Nob. Verse 11, "The king sent someone to summon Ahimelech, the priest, the son of Ahitub, and all his father's household, the priests who were in Nob. And all of them came to the king. Saul said, 'Listen now to the son of Ahitub.' And he answered, 'Here I am, my lord.' Saul said to him, 'Why have you and the son of Jesse conspired against me?'" He's talking about David there. King David loved Saul. King David never tried to kill Saul. The one time he cut off his jacket, he felt bad about it. He was never against Saul, not that way. But Saul here is accusing him of it, and also not only his family, not only the Most High, the anointed king of God, David, that's what I'm talking about, but also the high priest. Verse 14, "Ahimelech answered the king and said, 'And among who of all your servants is as faithful as David? Even the king's son-in-law, who is captain over your guard and is honored in your house. Did I just begin to inquire of God for him today? Far be it from me. Do not let the king impute anything to his servant or to any of the household of my father, for your servant knows nothing at all in this whole affair.'" He is saying right there, King Saul, you are wrong. You are charging me as guilty of something I have never done. Verse 16, the king said, you shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's household. So not just Ahimelech, but everybody else. Why? Verse 17, the king said to the guards who were standing, attending him, turn around and put the priests of the Lord to death, because their hand also is with David, because they knew that he was fleeing and did not reveal it to me. Now you remember that God is with David here and not with Saul. And so here is King Saul. Everybody who's around him, he is accusing falsely, thinking the worst of him. Do you notice the words that keep on coming up with Saul? Against me, against me, against me. This man has a heart problem. All he thinks about is himself. The person who assumes the worst of other people is only thinking about themselves and has a heart problem. Here's the last passage for the night. 1 Corinthians 13 deals with this. In fact, this is so prevalent a problem that God has written in His book that we are not to do this. Don't fall prey to this. 1 Corinthians 13:4. Love is patient. Love is kind, is not jealous, does not brag, is not arrogant, does not act unbecomingly, it does not seek its own, it is not provoked, it does not take into account a wrong suffered. Remember this for later. There are some people who actually are wronged, and they're not supposed to take that into account. Verse 6, it does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth. Verse 7, it bears all things, it believes all things. And then it goes on to say, hopes all things. Some uninspired, smart people wrote these things about 1 Corinthians 13. Love is ever about the believes all things. I believe the best. Love is ever ready to allow for circumstances and to see the best in others. In other words, I'm not going to just jump to, it might look dirty, rotten, and nasty. Sometimes it did in those passages. It might look that way, but it actually wasn't. And so I need to be very careful before I go there. I'm not going to go there until I have concrete proof that that's actually what they intended. Love is ready to allow for circumstances. There might be something I'm not understanding here. Yeah, sure, it looks nasty, but I'm not going to go there. And to see the best in others. Judgmentalism is merciless. This is James chapter 2 talks about this. Whereas love believes all things, the judgmental person disbelieves all things. He presumes the worst. He reads evil into the most innocent of actions. He impugns motives. He refuses to give others the benefit of the doubt. Judgmentalism is the opposite of the magnanimous, big-souled person. A man sinning more than sinned against. Remember, the person who is sinned against does not take into account a wrong suffered. This person hasn't actually been sinned against and instead is sinning against the other person. It would be better to be deceived 100 times than to live a life of suspicion. A Christian man will reckon it better to be imposed upon by his own kindness and easy temper than to wrong his brother by an unfriendly suspicion. Love believes all things. This is the conclusion of our second perspective. I hope these have been helpful for you and edifying, and that we leave here better equipped to be righteous, godly servants of His. If you are struggling with a heart problem and would like the prayers of the congregation, if you're struggling with sin and need the prayers of the congregation, if you have never become a child of God and would like to study about that, please make your intention known as we sing the song that has been selected. Thank you.